It's on YouTube.
My mom watched the last one.
Did you? What did you think?
She told me she's wanted to see me get sworn in.
Oh, that is so sweet.
Cool.
She didn't stick around for the budget talks. though.
Because I come out.
So if you ever need to have trouble sleeping, pop that on. I don't mean to, it's not boring. If we're not into it, you know, it's.
He ever gonna be done? No. It's like me in Dateline, so when I can't sleep, I watch Dateline, because
Yeah.
the guy's voice is.
Oh, yeah.
very-
For sure.
I mean, it's a horrible topic, but his voice puts me to sleep.
I used to watch Ghost Adventures or something with my kids when they were younger, and I'd always fall asleep. Like halfway through, they're like, "Why are you watching this for? He's asleep." Yeah. Clock is never on time.
Okay, there's something about this. room. I don't know, we've done
hour.
4 o'clock.
I don't know how it works.
Once we do spring forward, we'll be an hour late too for a while. So hopefully no one in the city's had a busted pipe yet, but I guess we'll figure that out once things start to unthaw somewhat.
Right.
We had one last year, that was not fun.
My water pressure was so bad the other day, I actually checked to see if there was a leak, but no, the meter wasn't running, so I'm like, not a leak, just crappy water pressure.
Oh, my head is down low, but it doesn't feel like I have the same water.
Maybe you've just become accustomed to bad water.
Said my well was really good in the last.
Okay, it's 6 o'clock. Let's go ahead and call this meeting to order. Please stand and I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, everyone, welcome to our special city council session. Hybrid like normal. What we're going to do today is we're going to start off with our council training. And we have our city attorney here to lead us in that. After that, we will move into an executive session, followed by an executive session. We'll close the executive session and see if there's other city business, which I do think we do have some other city business, but it won't take too long. And yeah, we're getting that thing. All right, but we're not going to close it yet, right? Nope, we're good. I haven't done anything wrong yet. Okay, so with that, and I do not see the agenda with the page on. Let's go ahead and kick this off. I will hand this over to our city attorney, and we'll go through our training then.
I am Emily Madison. I have been your city attorney for
A long time.
probably like 3 years now, and I think this is my first time in person here, so I'm very happy to be here, to put names to faces, and to meet you guys in person. Where's the?
I've got the.
PowerPoint? I got the
Okay, just one moment.
Okay.
You need to experience city hall.
I do agree. It is nice meeting you in person instead of just over email and video calls. Yeah.
I feel like once a year in person maybe makes sense. So we'll see. The training or another important meeting.
We don't have too much needs for you. City attorney.
King is a god.
Okay, so, we're doing your city council training orientation today. So, the goals for tonight, I don't expect to teach you all of the nuances of the law here in 1 hour. I want to give you the tools to recognize issues as they arise in your role as counselor, and then, sort of when it happens, you get a tickle in your brain and come to me and ask me questions. So sort of to expose you to the issues so you can recognize them as you go about your role as counselor. So what we're gonna go over tonight is, sort of an overview of the council, and that'll include, council's authority, meetings, and then types of decisions that you make as a council. Then we'll talk about public records and a brief little moment on public meetings, and then government ethics laws, sort of the plan. So starting with council's function, your function as a council within the city is twofold. You are, one, to enact city code through the passage of ordinances, and then two, to help build a common vision for Hubbard through creative and representative municipal policy making. I think that's basically from your charter. The city charter creates a council form of government in which all powers are reserved to council unless delegated to another person or body. Council conducts its business as a body, and what that means is that you as an individual have no power or authority to act on behalf of the city. Your authority comes from being on council, and council acts as a body. Okay. The city administrator serves as the administrative head of the city, and this is something that we enacted, yes, you enacted, I helped with a few years ago. It did not change your charter, so your charter still sets out the council form of government. However, you did create this position of city administrator that serves as the administrative head of the city. The city administrator also serves as the finance director. The city administrator has the authority to supervise the 3 department heads, and those are the city recorder / director of administration, the public works superintendent, and the chief of police. So, counselors are generally not to get involved in administrative functions. You are not to attempt to influence city staff on the making of appointments, the awarding of contracts, the selection of consultants, the processing of development applications, the granting of city licenses and permits, and all other administrative functions. Basically, the council delegated those roles to the city administrator to supervise and oversee. To the extent those matters do require your involvement, they'll be brought to you by staff in a council meeting. So, more about city administration. You are generally not to attend meetings with city staff unless you are requested to do so. If you have questions or requests for more information, you should direct those to department heads or to the city administrator, ideally. If you do seek additional information, that information will be shared with your fellow counselors. That's what that third bullet says. This one is important. I did not do an entire section on political activities this year for this orientation because it's not an election year. I mean, it's not a general election, main big election year. But basically, this is a good rule to live by. Don't solicit political support from staff. You should also limit other requests for staff support, Routine secretarial support is provided. Mail for your counselors is opened by city staff unless you make other arrangements. And then you should check with staff on correspondence that's directed to the council before taking action to see if any official response has already been made, so that it's not redundant and you don't nobody wastes their time. So council business, council generally uses Robert's Rules of Order to conduct its business. My advice is generally not to get caught up in the parliamentary rules, and I feel like you guys never
Yeah.
really do. Yeah, you're
I
pretty
think
good at.
most part I'll call some the point of order or something, but other than that.
Yeah. So you guys do that really well. My general advice is just to make sure it's clear what you're doing and that it's captured in the minutes, you know. The mayor or the council president serves, in the mayor's absence, I believe, serves as the presiding officer. Council elects a temporary presiding officer if both the mayor and the council president are absent. Unless a member of the council states that he or she is not voting, their silence is recorded as an affirmative vote. Okay, so continuing on to council business, the city recorder sets the agenda. And then, of course, during the designated period of the agenda, council members may bring forth issues or questions that aren't already on the agenda. And then comments may be limited at the presiding officer's discretion. Councilors can bring forth any business that they feel the council should deliberate on. Generally, issues raised that aren't on the agenda should be acted on at a future meeting, unless there is a compelling reason to hear it that night. Okay. Councilors are expected to conduct themselves with civility and decorum, even when difficult questions arise and disagreements arise. Those are generally in your council code of conduct. Councilors should wait to be recognized by the presiding officer before speaking. Councilors are not to publicly criticize or attack each other, city staff, or others. Business. So do not contact members of city boards and commissions to lobby on behalf of private interests. Council appoints members to boards and commissions, but members of such bodies do not report to individual council members. That's sort of the council acts as a body, right? Inappropriate behavior by a board or commission member should be noted to the mayor, who will provide counseling to the individual. So if you observe inappropriate behavior, then take it to the mayor, who will then deal with it. Okay. In all statements relating to public issues or policies, a councilor must take care to state whether your comments are personal opinions or representations of official city positions. Councilors must keep all materials provided to them on matters of confidentiality in complete confidence, and no mention of such matters should be made to anyone other than fellow councilors, the necessary city staff, or the city attorney. And confidential matters does include information discussed in executive sessions, which we will have on later tonight. Okay, moving to public meetings. So as you all know, so I guess before I get into this, I kind of abbreviated the public meetings portion of this presentation because OGEC now requires, state law requires that you get an OGEC training. I think it's every year. So you should have that at some point this year. And it's very comprehensive. I just took it last week. It's 2.5 hours.
Jeez.
It's long.
For taking that.
No, it's a new requirement. They just started offering these trainings, I think, this month. So I will coordinate with Sean to make sure that you guys are scheduled for that. But so I didn't feel like I should really dwell on public meetings since you're gonna be hearing about it for 2.5 hours sometime soon. So generally, the Oregon form of government requires an informed public aware of deliberations and decisions of governing bodies. I just noticed a unfortunate typo. Deliberations and decisions by a quorum of the council must be done in public. This is what I want to really focus my brief public meetings presentation on tonight is that when you show up to council, you can be confident that, show up to council meetings, you can be confident that the meeting has been properly noticed, the minutes are being taken, the requirements of the public meetings law are being met. The problem is having sort of accidental meetings outside of this room. And I want to kind of give you the tools to avoid doing that tonight. So beware of electronic meetings, email and social media, as well as serial meetings. And so I guess.
Can I interject? real quick?
Yeah.
So like when I send my weekly email update, feel free to send questions or make comments directly to me. Don't reply all, because then that can turn into a meeting. So that's one example.
Yeah, so I'll give a little more sort of background. So the law prohibits you to basically a quorum of the council to meet together, to convene a meeting to discuss matters that may come before you as a council. That includes not only contemporaneous meetings, so like when we're all in this room together, but also serial meetings. So if you talk to the mayor about something, that's not a quorum, right? But then if the mayor talks to another counselor and then another counselor talks to another counselor about that same topic, then a quorum has become involved, and that's where you get into trouble. That is technically convening a meeting under the law, and it wasn't properly noticed. You didn't take minutes. Right, it doesn't comply with the requirements of the public meetings law. So that's what you have to really be careful of. And that is also true in electronic communications. So like Sean said, by replying all, you can also get into trouble by convening a meeting inadvertently and then violating the public meetings law. So that's what you should watch out for. Lastly, purely social gatherings are not covered, but the key is not to discuss city business at social gatherings. And what I always tell our clients is that sometimes the only way you know someone on a council, I don't know if this is true here, but the only way you know each other may be through your role on the council. And so it's hard to avoid talking about that. So you have to really stay diligent in a social situation, not to talk about, you know, like you could easily come up like, oh, hey, that budget was crazy. And then, you know, end up flipping into a conversation, which would be outside of an official meeting.
But if you guys are gonna throw a party and talk about the budget, just don't invite me. I don't want to.
We'll go to the next one. It's specifically regarding social media. So for example, if there's a Facebook post about something happening in the city, and if I were to comment on it and then mayor would comment on it and then the president's manager would comment on it, would that be a meeting technically?
So if it is an issue that can come before you for a vote, yes, it could
Okay.
become a meeting on social
Okay.
media. It's just like a reply all situation.
So this is avoid.
So
Yeah.
just avoid it, yeah.
All right.
And be careful, like I know that sometimes it like on Facebook, for example, it hides older comments, so you may not see that another counselor has commented. Just be very careful.
Okay.
So just to let you know, sometimes when I do post an update or a specific topic for the public to consume, I'll turn comments completely off. So it's just a post, just some information,
Yeah.
no comments are turned on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And I should have said, you can ask questions throughout. This is kind of a long presentation, so, but go ahead and ask questions. We'll figure it out. Okay, this slide is more about control of public meetings. So the presiding officer has inherent authority to keep order and impose reasonable restrictions necessary for the efficient and orderly conduct of a meeting. Council should not eject an individual from a meeting unless that individual has actually disrupted the meeting such that council cannot conduct its business. And before we go to the next slide, I do want to talk a little bit about what that means. So an actual disruption means, and this is all based on First Amendment free speech case law. So what an actual disruption means is that you literally cannot do your job. You cannot, like someone yelling such that you can't actually take a vote on an issue, someone playing loud music, someone pounding a drum, something like that. It does not include someone silently holding a sign, even if it's a really upsetting or offensive sign. That's not an actual disruption, and we have case law that says that. Even if there is an actual disruption, my recommendation is that you warn the person that if they do not stop, then they may be ejected. But then rather than actually ejecting the person, my advice is to just recess the meeting. You can recess, take 10 minutes, you can continue the next day. If it's something that's lots of people are upset about, it's just a less risky option than actually ejecting a person from a meeting.
Just so you guys know, in the 7 years, you've only had one time where I've actually had to tell someone to calm down.
So let's talk briefly about executive sessions. Council may use executive sessions to discuss specific matters which are designated by law privately. No final decisions may be made in an executive session, which means that if it is something that does require a decision, you discuss it in the executive session, and then you conclude the executive session and you hold a vote. You don't have to explain your vote, but you do have to make the ultimate decision in a public meeting. In order to enter an executive session, you must follow specific procedures which are designated by law. I'm sure staff is really helpful in providing the script and the statute and everything. Media is permitted to attend in most situations. The two exceptions are, let's see if I can remember, labor negotiations. And then if the media is involved in litigation against the city. But other litigation, if an individual member or the entity they're reporting for isn't involved in litigation, then they can still sit in on the executive session.
So question,
Yeah,
how do you define media?
that is a very good question. The Attorney General has given some guidance on that. I can't remember the exact factors. It's basically a representative of a news organization. And so a personal blog or even a like news blog wouldn't necessarily qualify. It is really intended for designated news organizations. So like if it's a blog, it has to be attached to like a
It's got to
CNN.
rise to like Woodburn Independent, Statesman Journal, KGW, something like that.
I would say those are news
Legitimate,
media.
right, okay.
Yes, right. And if you ever have a question, and I've had some clients with people claiming like, I have they have like an account on a blog site. I can't think of what it's called, Substack. I have a Substack. I was a reporter. I now report local news for my Substack. Can I join? I would like to attend this executive session. Just let me know. I will help you analyze whether they can. The answer generally is no, unless their pieces are being published by a recognized news organization, probably not.
Okay.
But let me know and I'll help you work through that.
And again, in 7 years, we've never had media attend, but you know, I just.
Good to be prepared. Okay, so let's talk briefly about public records. The public records law governs both inspection and preservation of records. It applies to all government records of any kinds, memos, contracts, text messages, notes, photographs. The city may charge reasonable fees for inspection, but you have to adopt a fee schedule in order to do so. I assume you have, I'm sure you have. When a record is requested, there are exemptions that may apply that allow the city to keep some documents confidential. And I can help again, if there's ever questions about that. The city, so, we're talking a little bit about retention here. So the city, as I said, it's a log inspection and preservation, so we're on the preservation side. The city must follow record retention policies that are adopted by the Secretary of State's office. You must keep one official copy of each record for the applicable retention period. So I just did a webinar for our clients about public records, which is available on our website. I encourage you all to watch. It's like a whole hour on public records. But,
Another
so,
social gathering I don't want to go to.
so just, I like to give an example for keeping an official copy. Let's say you attend a meeting in your role as counselor and someone, Sean, hands out agendas to everyone. So you have a printed copy of the agenda. The law requires you, the city, to keep one official copy, right? So Sean created the agenda, she would probably be the one to keep the official copy. If in your role, as you're working, as you're at this meeting, you take notes on it. You note, thoughts you have about the issue that's being discussed, you note follow-up things to do, just ideas, that then is its own record. That becomes a record. That is a different record than the one Sean has that she generated. So then the city has an obligation to retain that record as well. So when it says must keep one official copy of each record, as I said, this is also a record that needs to be retained, and that does apply to council members. So your records that you generate as a result of your role have to be retained as well. And that's my next slide, next bullet anyway. Duty extends to counselors and mayor, not just employees, which means that social media posts are writings and are public records. Emails to or from your personal account, if they are pertain to the business of the council and their information, I can't remember the exact definition, I don't think. But if they pertain to city business, then you have to retain them. It doesn't matter the format they're on. Same with text messages. If you have text messages about city business, those become public records as well. And destruction of public records is a criminal offense. It is a crime. So it is important to understand what is and isn't a public record, and then make sure that you're keeping up with your obligation to retain them.
So I guess I have a question and a little bit of a concern, actually. So when I think of the Hubbard community page, councilors and mayors have posted comments to get information out there that's not on a city social media page or website. Since it's an elected official posting the post on a public social media site, are we required to keep that as a public record then?
My recommendation would be to keep that.
So should we just print it out?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay.
Another question.
Yeah.
When I do accidentally start taking notes, like I think I did today, do I have to turn that in then to have it scanned in somewhere, or is it just something I keep at home?
So it's up to you. Most, my recommendation would be to turn it in, because then they can ensure that it's retained through the required retention period. If it is requested, then we know to search it. But it's ultimately up to you as a council, or as a councilor, I suppose. You just, I want to make clear that you do have an obligation to somehow do something with it, right? And just let me know too, because then I'll know if I am helping with a public records request. I'll know whether I need to go to you or if I can just go to staff to get the requested records. Okay. Okay, now we're going to talk about decision making. So you as a council generally make 3 different types of decisions. You make quasi judicial decisions, which are made by order. And the best example of that is a land use application. You also make administrative decisions, which are made by resolution. And the best example of that I have is rates, setting rates for your city or your, city staff, not staff, staff's the wrong word, but people who interact with the city. And then thirdly, you make legislative decisions which are made by ordinance, and that's any code amendments or any code change. So I wanna spend a little time talking about quasi judicial decisions because special rules apply to those. So a quasi judicial decision typically applies pre-existing criteria to an individual person or individual piece of land. And again, this is most commonly land use decisions that come before you. Determining whether a proceeding is quasi judicial turns on whether the decision displays certain characteristics. One, that it is bound to result in a decision. And what that means is you have to approve or deny, for example. You can't just, like, if an ordinance comes before you, an ordinance is not a quasi judicial decision, it's a legislative decision. If an ordinance comes before you, you can postpone, you can decide not to do anything, right? Quasi judicial decision is bound to result in this, in a decision. You have to approve, vote to take an action, whether it's approve or deny. That makes sense. Secondly, it is bound to apply pre-existing criteria to concrete facts. And third, it is directed at a closely circumscribed factual situation or a relatively small number of persons. And again, that differs from, like, an ordinance, a legislative act. For my example before was the nuisance code, that applies to everybody, right? So a quasi judicial decision applies to only one or a very few number of people. Okay. The reason this is important is that a quasi judicial decision must comply with general standards of due process, which include the opportunity to be heard, the opportunity to present and rebut evidence, an impartial decision maker, a record, and written findings that are adequate to permit judicial review. And we'll talk, that's sort of where I'm going with this. We'll talk more about your role in due process in just a minute. But I do want to talk very briefly about legislative decisions so that you can kind of understand what is what when they're before you. So legislative decisions typically involve the adoption of more generally applicable policies, standards, et cetera, that apply to a variety of factual situations and a broad class of people. Because a legislative decision is the expression of local government policy, the local government is not required to reach a decision on a legislative proposal and may table the issue or decline to review it altogether. That's what I was sort of talking about before with ordinance. You aren't required to approve or deny. You can not do anything. And legislative decisions made by ordinance. So this is why this is all important because for quasi judicial issues, you have to think about ex parte contacts, bias, and conflicts of interest. Those are all relevant for quasi judicial proceedings, and those are all elements of due process. For legislative decisions, only conflicts of interest have to be always on your mind, but especially for legislative decisions, but for everything. Okay, so let's talk about what these are. So an ex parte contact is loosely defined as any communication or information about the matter before you that is obtained from any source outside the hearing. And so the common understanding is a meeting, an email or text, or a phone call with an interested party that is outside the hearing process. So like the applicant on a land use application, may call you or something. But that's the sort of most common understanding of an ex parte contact, but what I want you to understand is that it's actually much broader than that. It includes any evidence relating to a pending application that is relied on by a hearing body member in making a final decision that is not fully disclosed. So as you can see, it's much broader than just a communication with an interested party. It's any information that you take in, and that can include a newspaper article that you read. It can include a blog post that you read, a radio report that you heard. Those are all considered ex parte contacts and must be disclosed. And we're going to talk about disclosure next. So ex parte contact does not render a decision unlawful as long as there's full disclosure of the contact. And there are two components of full disclosure. First, placing the substance of the ex parte contact on the record, and second, a public announcement of the ex parte contact. So this disclosure, the two-part disclosure, must occur at the earliest possible time in the decision-making process, and that is intended to give the public an opportunity to rebut the substance of the ex parte. That's sort of the purpose of that. Okay, so basically this first bullet says that communications with staff are not considered ex parte contacts. You can talk to staff about applications and about gathering more information and everything. However, staff may not serve as a conduit for obtaining information outside of the public process unless that information is disclosed. So don't say like, hey, Sean, talk to the applicant, or hey, Sean, what's the newspaper saying? And expect that that won't include, or that won't be an ex parte contact. Okay, so next we're going to talk about bias. That's another issue that you have to be aware of for quasi-judicial decisions. So a biased decision maker substantially impairs a party's ability to receive a full and fair hearing. Bias can be in favor of or against the party or the application, but generalized expressions of opinion are not bias. So I don't remember. Sometimes I talk and then I realize I'm gonna get it. So basically, what I want to say is that you acting as a decision maker on in a quasi-judicial role aren't expected to be free of any bias. And in fact, you were elected probably because you have opinions about things that are going on in your community. And that doesn't mean that you're biased. I would say that you are expected to put the bias to the side when an issue is before you and apply the standards and requirements to the factual situation before you when making a decision. Okay. So let's see. I'm gonna go back to the slide and then I have some examples that I want to go over. So bias or actual bias, this is a great thing. Actual bias means prejudice or prejudgment of the parties or the case to such a degree that the decision maker is incapable of being persuaded by the facts to vote another way. So again, you as an elected official obviously have opinions on things that are happening in your community. But actual bias means you are incapable of seeing the facts before you and making a reasoned decision based on the standards and everything that applies to those facts. So it's pretty extreme. It can include personal bias, it can include personal prejudice, and it can include an interest in the outcome. Okay, so now I want to read some examples of bias. And these are from LUBA cases. These are real situations. So prior to the decision, a city councilor sent a letter to the entire council concluding that the applicant did not have the right to use the structure for the proposed use.
He's got a predetermined decision. He doesn't, yeah.
Yeah, the LUBA agreed with. The councilor formed an opinion regarding the legality of the real estate sales office prior to receiving evidence during the course of the city council proceeding. And it was clear to LUBA that they had prejudged the application and it was biased. So here's another one. So the city councilor in this case was the member of a church that applied for a conditional use permit. The city councilor expressed concerns about conditions that were imposed on the church, but ultimately voted to approve the permit. And I didn't give you enough information for you to actually decide, but the LUBA found that it was not biased because the decision maker expressed a concern, but in this case, declared that she was able to render a decision based on the facts and the law before her, excuse me. So she had not prejudged the application. So it was the fact that even though she had an interest, like I mentioned before, she declared that she was able to, she didn't have prejudice or prejudgment such that she was incapable of viewing it in that way. However, and the thing I want to say about this still was appealed, which took time and resources. So it's a good sort of reminder to if you are, for like in this case, a member of a church with concerns about the application, you should consider recusing yourself, even if you're not fully biased, because it does cost city resources and time. Okay. So let's talk about conflicts of interest, which is sort of our transition into the ethics law portion of the presentation. So an actual conflict of interest is defined in the ethics laws, which are in ORS 244. And it's defined as any decision or act by a public official that would result in a private pecuniary benefit or detriment. And pecuniary just means financial. So any decision or act by a public official that would result in a private financial benefit or detriment. And that extends not only to the individual public official, so not just to you, but also to all of your relatives and any business with which you or your relative is associated. And we're going to talk about what those terms mean. So the ethics laws define relative, and it means, and every time this is so silly to read, but I'm going to read it. So a relative includes the spouse, parent, step-parent, child, sibling, step-sibling, son-in-law, and daughter-in-law of the public official. A relative also includes the public official's spouse's parent, spouse's step-parent, child, sibling, son-in-law, and daughter-in-law. It also includes any individual that the public official has a legal obligation to support and any individual to whom or from whom the official provides or receives benefits from employment. So that just means basically, if you're in a civil union and your partner has a kid that you adopt or something. These are intended to sort of capture similar situations to those in 1 and 2. Okay. As I said before, let's go back to the conflict of interest means financial gain or loss to any business with which you are associated. So what does a business with which a public official is associated mean? It means a person is associated with a private business if you are a director, officer, owner, or employee or agent of the business, or if you own or have owned more than $1,000 worth of stock, equity interest, stock options, or debt interest of that business in the preceding calendar year. Also, if it's a publicly held corporation, you are associated with it if you are an officer or director of the publicly traded company, or if you own or have owned more than $100,000 worth of stock in the preceding calendar year. I don't remember if I cover statements of economic interest. I think I do. It's a form that you file with OGEC, which we'll get to. And so you are associated with a business if you are required to file your statement of economic interest, and that business is a source of income that produces 10% or more of your total annual household income. So that should be clear, when you're filling out your statement of economic interests, which you do every year, in April. I think.
April.
April, yeah, great. So a common question I get is, I sit on a board of a 501c3 for nonprofit, and that is coming up for a grant opportunity that I have to vote on. Is that a conflict of interest? And 501c nonprofit, so any, organization recognized by the IRS as a 501c organization is explicitly exempt from conflict of interest laws. So you can vote on it. That's a common question. Okay. So if you have an actual conflict of interest, you must both announce the actual conflict of interest, and you must refrain from taking official action or even participating in any discussion or deliberation on the matter that the conflict stems from. Again, if you have an actual conflict, you have to announce it, and then you cannot even discuss it. It's more than just voting. You cannot vote on it, but you cannot even discuss it. And that differs from a potential conflict of interest. So let's talk a little bit about potential conflicts. So it's distinguished from an actual conflict of interest in that the benefit or detriment could occur, while in an actual conflict of interest situation, the benefit or detriment would certainly occur. And we're going to talk a little bit, I'm going to give you some examples, but in the case of a potential conflict of interest, you must announce the conflict, but then you may discuss it and may even vote on it if it's just a potential conflict of interest. So I have some examples here. Which I actually do know one time, so I'm gonna read them. So a school district has decided to construct a new elementary school, and the school board is at the stage of developing criteria for the construction bid process. A recently elected school board member's son owns a construction company in town. Would the school board member be met with a conflict of interest if they participated in official actions to develop the bid criteria? And if so, is it actual or is it potential?
Sounds like potential to me.
Yeah, I agree with you. It is a potential conflict because if she takes, the official actions she takes could financially impact her son's construction company, which is a business with which her relative is associated. But it's not necessary, it's not awarding the contract, which is, I think, the next post I just gave it away. But, so what should the school board member do in this case? It's a potential, they're faced with a potential conflict of interest.
Oh, you announce it.
Yeah. You announce it, but you can still participate.
Right.
So she publicly announces the potential conflict of interest every time this issue arises, but she may participate in the discussion. She may vote in any official action on the issue once it's been publicly announced. So, okay, same school district is soliciting bids for the construction of their new elementary school. The bid deadline was last week, and the district superintendent has notified the school board that there are 4 qualified bids. And the school board will be awarding a contract to one of the 4 bidders at their upcoming meeting. One of the qualified bids was submitted by the construction company owned by a school board member's son. Would the school board member be met with a conflict of interest when awarding this bid, and is it actual or potential?
This is actually-
It's not a quiz, I'm not testing you, but it is, yes, it is an actual conflict because the effect of her decision would have a financial impact. Whether she awards it to him or not, it has a financial impact on him. If she doesn't award it to him, then he loses that contract, right? So either way, it has a financial impact on him. On her
So what if
son's
it's the
company.
lowest bid? The lowest bid wins, right? So,
Well,
But she
council,
still has to recuse herself from that discussion
yeah,
and let the rest of the board vote.
yes, and that's exactly it. What should the school board member do? Publicly announce the actual conflict and then refrain from participation in any official action and even from participating in the discussion.
And in the past, when we've had that actually happen, the counselor will actually go sit in the audience, actually remove themselves from the dais.
And then last, I have a last, sort of hypothetical, which is, the same school district is soliciting bids for the construction of a new elementary school. One of the qualified bids was submitted by a construction company owned by a board member's best friend. But neither the board member nor any of the board member's relatives are associated with the construction company. Would the school board member be met with a conflict of interest when awarding this bid? And if so, is it actual or potential? I see some skepticism on your faces, which is right. There's no conflict here.
Yeah.
Because the effect of her official decision would not or could not have a financial impact on herself, on a relative, or on a business with which she or her relative is associated. So in this case, and I actually got this question literally today from another client, what should the school board member do? Nothing is legally required, but in a small community, oftentimes a perception of a conflict is itself can be a public relations issue, for lack of a better word. It's not a legal issue. So the school board member could, if she wanted to, nothing is legally required, announce the appearance of a conflict and state that because it's not an actual or potential conflict, she will be participating in discussion. She doesn't legally need to do that, but like I said, oftentimes the mere appearance, can become a problem.
Just to clarify,
Yeah.
once we talked about if you recuse yourself going down and sitting with the public, you're not at that point able to come up as a public member and share an opinion either, right? Because you're still an elected official.
I would definitely
Just wanted to make sure.
recommend doing that, yeah. I'm trying to be conscious of time. Okay, let's see. So here are some sort of exceptions. Or one exception to the conflict of interest law, where a public official or their relative is part of a class that consists of a larger group of people that are affected by a decision, no conflict exists. And this is complicated, but my best example is that a decision to pave, for example, an unimproved street in your neighborhood might affect your property value. High or low, I don't know. But that could result in a pecuniary benefit, a financial benefit to you, right? Or a detriment. However, that you are part of a class that consists of a larger group of people that are affected by that decision to pave an unimproved street in your neighborhood. So in that case, no conflict exists. There is no hard and fast rule on the size or type of class to which this exemption applies. And it depends very much on the facts of each case. So if you see this happening, you should contact me and I'll help you work through the issue. Or contact OGEC. OGEC is even better. And I have a slide on that. Okay. So we're gonna talk a little bit about gifts. So, the law prohibits public officials, relatives of public officials, and members of a public official's household from soliciting or receiving any gifts over $50 in a calendar year from any source that has or could reasonably be expected to have, and this is the important part, a legislative or administrative interest in the public official's decisions or votes. So that's what this look to the source of the gift means. You can accept gifts. Your kids can give you gifts, your wife can give you gifts, people can give you gifts. If they have a legislative or administrative interest in your decisions on the council, then you should be aware. That doesn't mean there are lots of exceptions. I think I counted before I gave my last orientation, and I think there were like 22 exceptions to the gift law. So there's lots of exceptions. But if someone has a legislative or administrative interest in your work here, and that might be a developer, that might be a lobbyist, that comes in lots of forms, it should like I said at the beginning, tickle your brain and maybe do a little more research on whether you can accept that gift. And that $50 is cumulative. I don't remember if I have more slides. Okay, let's talk about what a gift is. A gift is anything of economic value, but it excludes, and that's what I was talking about, there's tons of exceptions. So gifts from relatives or members of your household, gifts in the form of tokens, plaques, trophies, or mementos that have a resale value of less than $25, gifts received as part of your private business, employment, or volunteerism. There's tons of exceptions. Oh, that's my last slide on it. Okay. Let's talk about abuse of office. Public officials may not use or attempt to use their position to obtain financial gain or avoid financial detriment that would not otherwise be available but for the holding of the official position. My favorite example of that is, and this really happened, a city employee, to explain abuse of office. You may not use or attempt to use your position to obtain a financial gain that would not otherwise be available but for your position. And this applies to all public officials, which includes city staff. So in this instance, a city employee was buying a bunch of vehicles for the city fleet. And they got this great screaming deal on these vehicles because they were buying a bunch for the fleet. So what the city employee decided to do was to just use the discount and buy themselves a car. They used their own money, so they did not use city money. It was not like that illegal in that way. They used their own money to add one additional car on to these, 20 cars they bought for the fleet. That was an abuse of office because they didn't, that discount, that financial gain in the form of the discount was not otherwise available but for their position as a fleet employee. So OGEC made them pay, I don't remember exactly what the punishment was, but it was a violation. Okay, confidential information. I think we're almost done. Maybe not. Confidential information, public officials may not further or attempt to further personal gain through the use of confidential information that is gained in the course of or by reason of their official positions or activities in any way. A good example of this would be like you have a new, we can make it something good or something bad, a new landfill coming to town or a new great, community center that is going to either way affect property values. You may not use, and you find out about this before it becomes public, you may not use that confidential information that you gained to further or attempt to further your position. So you can't like buy a property, sell your property next to the landfill or buy your property next to the community center or whatever, right? Okay. SEI filing, this is what we talked about earlier. The annual verified statement of economic interest must be filed with the OGEC by April 15th of each year and becomes a public record. It covers all your assets from the previous calendar year, just like your taxes. It's basically a declaration of income, holdings, and business associations. OGEC provides the forms. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, yeah, we're very close. Okay, nepotism. A public official may not participate in the appointment, employment, promotion, discharge, firing, or demoting. So basically any employment decision of a relative or member of the public official's household. Public officials may not directly supervise a relative or member of that public official's household unless a local policy expressly permits, and basically the local policy just delegates all the employment decisions to someone else. So really, you may not directly supervise a relative in any circumstances. You can't have a local policy that circumvents the state law.
You're safe, not related to Sean.
No.
Okay, so the last thing for my presentation on ethics laws is that they are personal to the public official. And by that, I mean, if you do have issues or questions, I represent the city, and these issues are personal to you. So I can talk through issues with you, but I can't give you advice on ethics laws issues. And so, and they're enforced by OGEC, but OGEC is great about answering questions. They have tons of resources on their website, including guides, opinions, trainings, and their staff makes themselves really available in case you do have questions. And the last thing I'll say, it's sometimes scary to ask the people who enforce the law if you believe that maybe you have a problem, right? If you believe you have an ethics law issue, it's scary to go to the people who enforce it, but they do provide opinions, official opinions on issues. And if you get one of those, it's a safe harbor. So if you sort of project to the future and see, oh, this might be an issue in the future, and get advice from OGEC, then you're protected. And you won't, if you follow that advice, then you won't get in trouble. So that's sort of a way for me to encourage you to go to OGEC. But like I said, their staff is great. They answer the phone, they answer questions all the time. It's really a good resource. And that's all. Do we have, are there any other questions?
Do this, so. Well, honestly, I mean, if in doubt, ask a question, be mindful of gifts, free drinks at the bar, I just say no.
Totally. That's my other example.
Yeah.
It's $50, it's
Yeah,
accumulative
you can add
over
up
a
quicker.
year, it adds up quick.
And you don't want to put yourself in a position of them saying, hey, you know, these drinks, now you're gonna deny this, what's going on? Just don't put yourself in a position, you know, just don't compromise your own integrity. It'll be fine.
And if you have questions, come to me. If it's an ethics law question, like I said, I can talk through issues with you, or I might just send you off to OGEC.
And the statement of economic interest is not difficult. It's not like doing your taxes. It's pretty simple. And once you have it done, it's just like, oh, same one, nothing's changed.
Totally. Oh, it's pretty impressive.
60 seconds early. Okay, what's the land use training for? Because there was a land use training.
So I'm not giving the land use training. We used to give you a little packet explaining land use. We decided that we didn't want to update the presentation and the packet. As you guys know, the legislature is frequently changing land use laws. So it's just, that is our supplemental materials. If you want a land use training, I'm not a land use attorney, but I can get Josh Soper or someone else in our office to come.
And I do, just real quick for mayor and council, the legislative changes that have been made in the last short session. The COG is working on updating that information to present to council. So we don't know if that's gonna be February, March timeframe. We're kind of trying to juggle agenda items so the agendas aren't huge, but those will be provided to you as well, so.
Perfect. I think we're done with, unless there's additional questions. And if you do, you can always reach out to me. You can reach out to Counselor Steinberg, said Joseph, or Administrator Wait, or Arthur. I mean, again, it's pretty straightforward. Just keep your head above things, you'll be fine. And I see that, yeah, there was an agenda change, and I totally missed that one, add 1B.
She was waving today.
Yeah, no, she was, that's completely ignoring her. Okay, agenda 1B, let's move on with our normal, regular meeting then. Approve the January 14th, 2025 City Council meeting minutes. And real quick, Director Noble, on this one, do you want us to also, for me to read into the statement, the changeover after this of why we have Counselor Steininger, et cetera, replacing James Aldrich?
That'd be great.
Okay, so let's go ahead and approve the minutes and then I'll read that other part of the statement. So we do have, thanks, I would like to make a motion to approve the January 14th, 2025 City Council minutes.
A second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that is completely unanimous. The second part is to read into the minutes, we have, James Andrich, who was the city council, president, prior to his term ending on December 31st, 2024. Remember that. Has now left. We have nominated and elected to replace him as city council president, Joseph Siminger, to be effective January, was it 14th?
Yes.
14th, 2025. Thank you. Should that be sufficient for the minutes?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. With that, let's move on to agenda topic number 3 then, and council, and I am reading the correct one. Council will recess open public meeting and convene closed executive session to review and evaluate the employment-related performance of the chief executive officer of any public body, a public officer, employee, or staff member who does not request an open hearing per 192.6602I pursuant to ORS 192.6604. The council specifically requests that members of the media and other attendees not disclose the matters discussed in this executive session. My English is so messed up.
So, at this time, I would ask that Chief Parisi and the superintendent be dismissed.
Thank you both for attending.
Thank you.